All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining today. I'm Pooja. I am going to start sharing my screen. Thanks so much for being here today. Today, we're having a webinar on 2026 California legislation that saves money using local clean energy. My name is Pooja Agarwal. I'm the Community Energy Resilience Policy Manager at the Climate Center, and I'm really excited to be moderating today's webinar. Really thrilled to have this amazing slate of speakers today. Unfortunately, Senator Josh Becker is on the floor today voting on the budget, so he was not able to join us. But we're really thrilled to have Ken Branson stepping in his stead, who's the senior policy advisor for Senator Becker. So thanks, Ken, for joining. We're also really glad to have Bernadette Del Chiaro, who's with the Environmental Working Group, Derek Chernow from the Californians for Local Affordable Solar and Storage, and Matthew Friedman with the Utility Reform Network. So thanks all for joining and being here today. We're also really grateful for our sponsors for supporting this work. Thanks to MCE, Peninsula Clean Energy, River City Bank, and Sunrun. And also thank you to our promotional partners for helping us promote these webinars. So just before we get started, I wanted to set some context for why we're talking about legislation using local clean energy. This really, sits in line with the Climate Center's vision for a grid for the future that is affordable, clean, and resilient. And we really see distributed energy resources at the center of this grid for the future. DERs are essentially small-scale energy resources that generate, store, and consume energy near where electricity is used, like solar, home batteries, and smart thermostats, electric vehicles. These are all resources that can be used more effectively to help meet our local energy needs, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and most importantly, save Californians money, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And another just, context-setting slide. Today, we're really here to spotlight a few policies that are being considered in California that we can enact this year to help save money and also meet our climate and clean energy goals. And this was really, this headline really tells it all. Why aren't we using distributed energy to cut utility bills? So here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with Ken Branson, the senior advisor to Senator Becker, talking about SB 905, which is about electricity affordability and grid utilization, and SB 913, which is about local clean energy. Then we're going to also hear from Matthew Friedman from TURN to talk more about SB 905. Then we're going to turn it over to Bernadette to talk about SB 868, the Plug and Play Solar Act. And then finally, we're going to hear from Derek Chernow to talk about AB 1813 on community solar. So I'm going to introduce Ken to come on screen and start his presentation.
Well, great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to the Climate Center for giving us the opportunity to talk about Senator Becker's energy affordability bills. First, he asked me to apologize to everybody for not being able to make it this morning, but he does really appreciate everyone's interest and support for his legislation. So I'm going to talk about two bills, as Pooja was saying, and these are both aimed at the same problem, right? Of how do we get clean and affordable energy and really lower electricity costs. So first, SB 905. This is Senator Becker's big energy affordability bill with five different reforms to get electricity rates under control. And when we think about high electricity rates, we're worried for two reasons. Obviously, it's causing real hardship. About 20% of households served by investor-owned utilities are behind on paying their energy bills. But it's also a big problem for our climate goals because we're not going to get people to switch to EVs and heat pumps or electrify their factories if electricity is too expensive. So this is a really number one priority. And as high as rates are already, the Public Advocate's Office is warning that it's likely to get worse. They reported that PG&E's pending rate requests would raise rates by another 30% by 2030. And of course, there's a lot of reasons for rising rates. The cost of trying to prevent wildfires and paying for all the damage caused by wildfires is a big problem. But we think there's a fundamental problem of bad incentives. Utilities earn bigger profits, and utility executives earn bigger bonuses by spending more money. And so we shouldn't be that surprised that they favor expensive investments like 10,000 miles of undergrounding rather than finding more cost-effective solutions that earn less profit. So this bill focuses utilities on spending money better, not spending more money. And let me talk about the five specific things it does. So first, it aligns the personal incentives of utility executives with keeping rates affordable. So it requires 20% of their annual compensation for anyone VP or higher to be tied to keeping rates from rising faster than inflation. If our bills keep going up, they don't get their bonuses. Then it requires the PUC to establish clear performance metrics on things like reliability, system utilization, greenhouse gas reductions, how well they're doing at preventing wildfires, and the speed of connecting new customers and clean energy resources. This makes clear what our expectations are for good performance so that we can hold utilities accountable against those metrics. And in particular, it has a section on grid utilization metrics that will push the utilities to get more value out of the infrastructure we've already built and paid for before proposing new spending. As Senator Becker often says, the grid is like a Walmart parking lot. You don't size the parking lot for a random Thursday morning like today. They size it to handle the crowds on the Saturday before Christmas. And as a result of that, most of the time, it has a ton of spare capacity. And it's very similar with the grid. We build it for the highest annual peaks, but those only occur a few hours a year. Our utilization averages less than 50% the rest of the time. So if we handle new load by increasing the average utilization, getting more out of the grid we've already built, that's one of our best opportunities to lower electricity bills. SB 905 also authorizes the PUC to give utilities a lower rate of return, a lower profit, for certain categories of investment with lower risk, or where the investor gets other benefits besides just the pure financial return. And a good example of that is undergrounding power lines to prevent fires. Investors like that spending because they earn a profit on it, and it lowers the risk of a big fire bankrupting the utility. So if you're given the same return for undergrounding as you are for other investments, you're going to want to overspend on it. And this bill corrects for that misaligned incentive by authorizing the PUC to say that undergrounding investments can earn a little bit less profit than the normal profit rate. And then finally, given the load growth we're expecting from EVs and data centers, we are going to have to build new infrastructure. And in that case, we still want the utilities to look for cheaper ways to pay for it. And SB 905 requires the PUC and the utilities to evaluate alternative financing options that would save ratepayers money. So this could be things like the securitization that we required last year. It's kind of a cheap form of debt financing, or the public financing of transmission, both things that were part of SB 254 last year. These are things that we should be looking for all the time, not just something that the legislature has to push on them. There was some recent polling done that shows the ideas in this bill are extremely popular. 83% of voters across the political spectrum think utility profits are too high. 86% support both tying executive compensation directly to affordability and requiring utilities to show that they're using the grid more efficiently before building more infrastructure and passing on those costs to ratepayers. So we think this bill is really getting at what the public is asking for. All right, I'm going to move to the second bill. There we go. And this is SB 913. And this bill is a specific way that we can increase grid utilization and get more out of the grid we've paid for. As we look ahead at how to meet the higher demand coming from EVs and electrified buildings and data centers, we can continue to upgrade substations and build new transmission lines, or at least in some cases, we can meet the higher demand by taking advantage of the energy storage or flexible loads like smart thermostats that people already have in their homes and businesses. Since people have already purchased those batteries and smart thermostats, we can pay them just a little bit to use those devices a few hours a year to deal with those highest demand peaks rather than the huge expense of upgrading a substation where all that extra capacity is needed only very rarely. And that's what people mean by virtual power plants or VPPs. So if we get this right, all that new demand will help pay for the grid and will pay a lot more than the extra cost that the utilities need to support them. And that will help lower electricity rates for everyone. And we often refer to that as beneficial load growth. And that's our goal. But it's important to realize that it's only beneficial if we can support the growth while keeping new costs down. And we have a great example of this. The demand side grid support program, which has been run by the CEC for the last 3 years, proved that we can scale up a VPP very quickly. That program already has more than 1,000 megawatts of distributed resources enrolled, which is about half as much power as is provided by Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. The potential for this is even bigger. The PUC has tracked about 3,000 megawatts of batteries already installed around the state, and we're installing new ones at about 100 megawatts a month. So this is getting big fast. Now, unfortunately, DSGS is funded from the state's general fund budget, which is not a reliable source for long-term funding. And in fact, the program may be defunded after this summer. So it's really important that we find a similar way for these distributed resources to be used to meet the grid's peaks that is just part of the normal resource adequacy program, the way that utilities make sure we have enough power to keep the lights on every day. So today, unfortunately, that program is much harder to enroll a battery in than DSGS, and that's what SB 913 is fixing. So let me highlight 5 things that the bill is doing. Today, enrollment requires an awkward series of web pages, switching between the company managing your thermostat and your utility, which just ends up causing a lot of people who are interested to give up. But for DSGS, my Tesla app on my phone just asked if I wanted to participate, and I clicked a button to say yes. 30 seconds, basically no effort on my part, and I was signed up. And since then, I've gotten credited about $100 every year for being part of the program. I usually don't even know when my battery is being used. That's how easy it should be if the PUC just fixes its requirements. Another problem, today, you can only enroll one device in your home in any load flexibility program. So if you have a smart thermostat and a home battery, only one can help the grid. And we need to fix that. And that gets to the next problem, which is it's hard to allow multiple devices to participate if you can't measure what each of them is doing. And the current rules look only at the customer utility meter, so they only see what is happening for the whole home. They can only guess how much the battery is helping reduce load or whether the thermostat has shifted demand. DSGS made this so much simpler by allowing the meters on the devices themselves to be used to report what was happening. Obviously your battery knows how much power it's exporting, but at the meter on your home, the system can only guess at what your battery's doing. All right, number 4, we have huge amounts of battery capacity out there, but we're only making use of a third to half of it because you're only allowed to offset the home's demand to the point where the home isn't putting any power, it isn't pulling any power from the grid. Many batteries could provide more power than that, exporting that extra power out into the neighborhood to help lower the total demand on the grid even more, but that's not allowed. The SGS allowed it. Why not the PUC? That would immediately double the amount of distributed capacity available to help the grid. And then finally, we need to prevent procurement requirements that make sense for power plants, but don't make any sense for VPPs from unintentionally or maybe intentionally disqualifying VPPs. Now, if we get this right, we can make use of all the devices people already own and are adding every day to meet the grid peaks with local clean power rather than building more grid infrastructure and turning on the dirtiest and oldest gas peaker plants. So lower rates, cleaner air, and money in the pockets of the people who are letting their devices be used to help the grid. What's not to like? All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Pooja.
Thanks, Ken. Really great explanation of both bills. We're really proud to work with you and Erica and Senator Becker on SB 913, and we're really hopeful that additional amendments will be adopted to make sure that this bill meets the goals that you outlined, leveling the playing field for these local clean energy resources to support the grid and be accurately valued for their contribution. And if you have any other questions about SB 913, you can reach out to our Government Affairs Director, Allison Hilliard, whose email will be in the chat. So next, we're going to be moving to Matt Freeman from Turn to talk a little bit more about SB 905.
Thanks, Pooja, and thanks, Ken, for the presentation. My name is Matt Friedman, and I'm a senior attorney at the Utility Reform Network, or TURN. TURN is an independent, nonprofit advocacy group here in California that represents the interests of the residential customers of the utilities across the state. We are active at the Public Utilities Commission and the legislature and in other forums. So we are really like the watchdogs here in California that spend a lot of our time fighting with the utilities and pushing for better state policies that promote affordability, sustainability, and accountability. Now I want to talk a little bit about SB 905, the bill that Ken was just addressing, authored by Senator Becker. Residential electricity rates have skyrocketed in recent years, creating a crisis of affordability for many Californians. SB 905 addresses this crisis through a series of long-term accountability and cost reduction measures designed to improve the performance of investor-owned electric utilities, better align utility investor and customer interests, and lower customer rates. Here are the key elements of the bill. First, SB 905 establishes new targets relating to utility performance, grid spending, and rates. Second, SB 905 conditions 20% of total compensation to high-level utility executives on the average cost of electricity increasing by no more than inflation. Third, SB 905 reduces utility profits for investments that reduce the risks to utility investors. Fourth, SB 905 directs the Public Utilities Commission to investigate opportunities to use cheaper ways to finance the grid, including bonds and public funds. And fifth, SB 905 directs utilities to find ways to increase their utilization of their existing grid as an alternative to spending on upgrades. SB 905 takes a bold but practical approach to tackling several root causes of the current crisis. The legislature and the governor should embrace these reforms and others needed to address the relentless rate increases that are undermining the quality of life for millions of Californians. Let me offer a few deeper observations on some of the provisions in the bill. But first, I want to thank Senator Becker for his leadership on affordability issues and his commitment to ambitious reforms designed to benefit consumers and to hold utilities accountable. This bill serves as a follow-up to SB 254, a bill that Senator Becker authored last year. That bill, which contained a series of affordability measures, passed the legislature and was signed by the governor. So it's law now, and we are in the process of implementing its many complex provisions. I want to talk about the crisis of affordability. Residential electricity rates have skyrocketed in recent years. This is not news to many of you who have opened your bills and noticed that they keep going up. It's created a crisis of affordability for many families across the state. Since 2020, residential rates have gone up by almost 60% for PG&E customers, by 65% for customers of San Diego Gas and Electric, and by almost 90% for Southern California Edison customers. According to a recent poll of the governor's race, voters in California say that utilities are the second biggest strain, only after housing, on household budgets. The top strain on household budgets was housing at 28%, but it was followed by utilities at 21%. And utilities were seen by voters as more significant than healthcare or groceries. One key indicator that bills have reached the breaking point is that customers are increasingly facing challenges paying their bills on time. Across the three investor-owned utilities, approximately a third of low-income customers are currently behind in paying their bills, and 1 in 7 non-low-income customers are also running up bill arrearages. And the news looking forward is not great, as Ken mentioned. In its most recent report to the legislature, the California Public Utilities Commission forecasts average annual rate increases of about 6 to 7%, that's annually, for each utility for the next several years. PG&E just came in with a request for about a 7% rate increase in 2027 due to generation costs, and has another major rate case pending that would increase by another 8%, increase rates by another 8% next year alone. San Diego Gas and Electric submitted its next rate case. It would drive up combined electric and gas bills by almost 9%. Meanwhile, the utilities are continuing to project substantial new grid investments. PG&E projects that its investments in the grid will increase by 9% per year. And Southern California Edison says their grid investments are going to increase by about 7% per year. The primary driver of massive rate increases in recent years has been large increases in utility spending, particularly on their distribution system due to wildfire mitigation. And so to reverse this trend, the utilities have to have their incentives better aligned with the goal of minimizing spending, optimizing the use of existing infrastructure, and finding less expensive methods to finance grid investments. So let me walk through a couple of the provisions that Ken mentioned of SB 905. First of all, performance-based metrics. As mentioned, this portion of the bill directs the PUC to develop new performance-based metrics that track investor-owned utility performance and establish targets that reflect improvements in key indicators of system performance, reliability, environmental impact, and rates. Information on these metrics and utility performance would be published on a public dashboard on the Public Utility Commission's website. And this type of transparency would really help the public to better understand how utilities are performing over time. The bill also conditions a minimum of 20% of total ratepayer-funded compensation to high-level utility executives on the average cost of electricity increasing by no more than inflation. And the purpose of this mechanism is to better align the interests of utility management with those of ratepayers. If a portion of an executive's compensation is tied to rates, these executives will be more highly motivated to take actions that will avoid large rate increases. Although the top-level executives of each utility do not have their salaries funded by ratepayers, that prohibition only applies to about 5 or 6 executives at each company. SB 905 would apply these performance-based compensation metrics to the next level of executives below the top officers. This should affect about 65 employees at PG&E, 40 at Southern California Edison, and almost 20 at San Diego Gas and Electric. The bill also requires certain types of capital investments that are placed into rate base to earn a lower return on shareholder equity to reflect the reduced risks associated with cost recovery and the lowering of overall risks to utility shareholders. This lower return is justified where the utility faces a lower risk of not being able to recover the costs, as is the case with capital that is recovered through what are called balancing accounts, or capital that's exempted from any type of reasonableness review at the state regulators, or for wildfire mitigation and undergrounding activities that lower the wildfire liability risk that might be faced by the utility's own investors. And by assigning a lower rate of return, which results in lower profits, SB 905 will motivate utilities to spend less on these categories and move more of its proposed spending into accounts and processes that are subject to comprehensive reviews at the California Public Utilities Commission. Next, the bill directs the PUC to evaluate opportunities for alternative methods of financing big capital investments in the grid, including the use of securitization and public financing. The purpose of this effort is to find lower cost ways to complete the same amount of work, simply said, getting more done for less. Using utility shareholder money to finance grid investments is very expensive. The authorized rate of return for investment capital provided by utility shareholders is just below 10%, but that's an after-tax return. So ratepayers are forced to pay not only the profits that utilities earn, but the taxes on those profits. And that means that ratepayers are charged over $1.40 for every $1 in utility profits. Alternative financing approaches don't require ratepayers to cover high investment returns, and they don't require the ratepayers to cover the extra taxes associated with those profits. Substituting lower cost debt financing or public financing can reduce ratepayer costs by between 1/3 and 1/2 over the life of any particular capital investment. And then finally, the bill requires each utility to track and report on the utilization of individual segments of its distribution system and directs the PUC to consider targets for increased utilization of existing assets as an alternative to new spending on upgrades. Utilities are generally motivated to invest in their grid because that's how they earn profits for their shareholders. But this element of SB 905 would force the utilities to seriously explore other options, including the use of demand response, load shifting, distributed energy resources, and other innovative approaches to managing distribution system constraints. We appreciate the bold approach taken by SB 905 to address several of the root causes of the current affordability crisis. Developing these new types of metrics, targets, and incentives related to utility operations has the potential to align shareholder and ratepayer goals in support of affordability. And of course, The key to getting good results under any legislative framework is to have regulators that want to do the right thing and who are willing to stand up to political pressure by the utilities. So the enactment of this bill really represents the first step towards long-term benefits. And this year, we are asking the legislature to commit to this first step. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Matt, and just appreciate you walking through a pretty complex bill at a more detailed level. I know if questions are coming up for folks, just a reminder to put your questions in the chat, and we'll have at least 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate you presenting. So now we're going to move to Bernadette to talk more about SB 868, the Plug and Play Solar Act.
Great. Hi, Pooja. Thank you to the Climate Center. Again, my name is Bernadette Del Chiaro. I'm Senior Vice President for California with Environmental Working Group, or EWG. We're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan environmental organization that's been around for over 30 years, helping arm consumers with solutions to public health and affordability problems like clean energy. So let me pull up my slide deck. Here we go. Okay. I'm assuming you can see it okay. So we're going to talk about SB 868 by Senator Scott Wiener, the Plug into the Sun Act. Sometimes the best way to save money is to just make something yourself. That's the idea behind SB 868 by Senator Scott Wiener. By cutting out the middleman, in this case, the utilities, SB 868 brings a whole new way of going solar. Small panels that feed electricity directly into apartments, condos, mobile homes, or houses via a simple wall outlet. That's it. No construction, no red tape, instant savings. A small system the size of a coffee table can generate enough electricity to power a fridge and a few other essentials like a modem or a computer. A larger system can power an air conditioner. Add a battery and you can run essential appliances during a blackout. Consumers can save anywhere from $100 to $700 per year. That's an immediate 6 to 30% bill reduction. And as rates go up, so do the savings, all while generating clean energy. So how do these systems work exactly? It's pretty simple. The primary component of a balcony solar or plug-in solar system are the solar modules. They come in a variety of sizes, as I just mentioned. They're connected to a thing called a microinverter, which is about the size of your laptop computer. That microinverter is attached to a power cord. That's pretty much it. Within the microinverter are Wi-Fi capabilities, so you can track the energy generated by your solar system, your plug-in system on your iPhone. And you can add a battery, that's optional, and that basically comes in between the inverter and the solar panels. The way this works, the way it saves consumers money, is pretty simple. The first thing you have to understand about electricity is that it doesn't care the direction it flows. It'll flow in whatever direction the electricity is needed, like an appliance that's turned on. So when you put a solar panel out on a balcony or a deck and you place it in the sun and you plug it into any outlet inside your home, it immediately starts generating electricity and sending those electrons backward through the outlet. Behind the outlet in the walls of your home or apartment are wires, and that'll just carry that solar electricity, immediately spreading it throughout your home or apartment and powering all of the devices that happen to be on at that moment in time. In so doing, you are reducing the amount of electricity you would otherwise be purchasing from your local utility had you not had that solar system up and running. And that's basically all that it is. It's just an immediate generation of electricity you made yourself, and then immediate powering of the devices that you have on inside your home, many of which are on all the time, 365 days of the year. So the history of plug-in solar, these are actually not new devices. They've been around for decades, but entirely in this sort of do-it-yourself world. What we're doing now, from beginning in the German market, kind of kicked things off a couple years ago, is we are making these accessible to average everyday people in a much safer way. So Germany has built about 4 million of these systems in 4 short years. It is really taking off there. as Germans also deal with extremely high electricity prices. The state of Utah was the first state in the United States to pass a similar law to SB 868 last year. And now many, many other states are following suit. So far this year, Colorado, Maine, Maryland, New York, and Virginia have all passed laws similar to SB 868 here in California. SB 868, in addition to being an affordability policy, it's also a safety policy requiring the highest form of standards, safety standards for electrical, structural, and fire risks to be applied to these devices before they're sold on the shelves of Home Depot or IKEA, or your local hardware store. So SB 868 does three simple things. One is it defines what is an eligible portable solar system. And the three main components of that definition are that it's movable, so it's just a portable device. It's less than 1,200 watts. To give you a sense of that size, that's about 1/5 or 1/6 the size of a typical residential rooftop solar system. Those are typically around 6 kilowatts to 7 kilowatts in size. This is much smaller than that. And then it just plugs into a regular wall outlet. We require safety standards, as I mentioned before. And then as a result of those conditions, the bill exempts these systems from interconnection requirements, fees, and it applies this statewide. So publicly owned utilities as well as investor-owned utilities. Everywhere in the state, you'll be able to plug into the sun if SB 868 passes. It does set up a simple online registration program if the utilities want to set one up. So Bill basically has had a good record so far of passing through its different legislative hurdles. It passed out of the Senate in a 35-1 with a 35-1 vote. Very strong. It passed the Assembly Utilities and Energy Committee recently with a unanimous 18-0 vote. We are going on summer break, as many know. The bill will be considered in the Appropriations Committee in August. But notably, the Public Utilities Commission gave it a negligible fiscal cost. So hopefully it gets out of that committee and then hopefully off of the Assembly floor in late August and then onto the governor's desk in September. We have over 100 consumer, low-income, affordability, environmental, and climate change groups supporting SB 868. We have removed the opposition of IBEW and the firefighters. PG&E is in a support if amended position, but we do have the remaining opposition of municipal utilities, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Southern California Edison, unfortunately. And so as a result, we really need more grassroots support from voters. We encourage people to call your assembly member and ask them to support SB 868. Encourage others to call and get your local elected officials to support the bill as well. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Pooja. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Bernadette. That's a great overview of balcony solar and a great also reminder that we have an action that you all can take, which is in the chat, to ask your legislators to support the bills that we're talking about today. So now we're going to pass it over to Derek. Thanks for waiting very patiently, Derek, to talk a little bit more about community solar.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja, and thank you to the Climate Center for hosting today. I think we've all heard today about the issue of affordability, and I think all these help address that issue, and I applaud the other panelists for bringing these all forward. Those were all Senate bills, and I'm pleased to bring forward an Assembly Bill 1813 by Chris Ward. And as we talk about affordability, community solar and storage is part of that discussion. It's something that's been around for quite some time. We've had community solar and storage in California for a dozen years, but it's never been implemented the way folks intended. The PUC continues to create barriers and issues with program implementation. And that's why Assemblymember Ward has brought forward AB 1813 this year to help address affordability, to help address grid reliability, and to create those types of clean energy jobs that we all need here in California. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen and run through a few slides for everybody. Again, I'm Derek Chernow with Californians for Local Affordable Solar and Storage. A number of folks here on the panel, they represent obviously organizations that have been around for a while and are rightfully well known in this space. CLASS is a new organization. I used to work for the National Trade Association. for community solar developers, but with the PUC constantly uh, uh, not properly implementing programs for community solar, a lot of the developers are working in states all across the country except California. So a number of companies wanted a California-specific group to take advantage of the relationships that we've been building, the outreach that we've done over the last few years, and we started class as we kicked off 2026, and I became the first executive director and proud to do so. Just a little bit more about class, but I'll include that in a slide that will be shared later. But basically, class is leading a large coalition of organizations. Many are on the call today: ratepayer advocates, labor, building industry association, environmental justice groups, and local government and community choice aggregators here that are just really moving forward on community solar and storage and getting behind AB 1813. A little bit of background here. Community solar is flourishing in over 20 states. California could be the largest market, but instead we fall further and further behind. Again, the PUC is responsible for implementing the program. When Assemblymember Ward introduced a bill 4 years ago that was signed with broad stakeholder support, the PUC spent 4 years going in the opposite direction from the legislative intent that was fairly clear. Spent 4 years issuing decision after decision, which tries to treat these projects as large-scale wholesale projects without compensating for storage, without compensating for avoided costs, and not treating these like they do all other distributed energy resources. So, thus, no projects, no jobs, no bill savings, and no grid benefits. And that's why we're back with Assembly Bill 1813 with just unprecedented support for a coalition just keeps growing. In just the past week alone, we had 5 more organizations jump on in support, again, like I mentioned, with 2 CCAs, community choice aggregators. So we've had supporting evidence for community solar. Obviously, it's operating in states all around the country, but Aurora Energy Research did a California-specific study last year, which shows that having a 5.5 gigawatt program of community solar and storage in California would save $6.5 billion. More importantly, the study also showed that not one ratepayer would be adversely affected. All ratepayers would benefit. And it's just an incredible study that we've been sharing with stakeholders, with elected officials, with decision makers. And then on top of that, as I think other folks have talked about, Deploy Action did a poll recently, which not only shows disdain for the IOU and the PUCs, something I think that we can all relate to, but it also included a slide on community solar, which showed that over roughly 80% of Californians support it, with wide bipartisan support. And I think that was a pretty telling, feature of this poll, was that it does indeed enjoy support up and down the state from folks as dispersed as, people who live in cities, farmers, wherever they may be in California, whatever their political affiliation, they do want to see community solar and storage in their state. So here we are with, Assembly Bill 1813. I think it all kind of kicked off at the beginning of this year when the Assembly Speaker made Assembly Bill 2316, the bill that was introduced and passed 4 years ago, the only clean energy part of his outcomes review process. That was a really telling thing that kind of set the tone for Assembly Bill 1813 as we move forward here. The bill the outcome review hearing was held in February. Gave a chance for solar champions to have their voices heard. It allowed us to present material and information to the Assembly Utilities and Energy Committee and really bring them up to speed with where we're going. Again, we've got a growing coalition building on top of a nucleus of folks who have been in this fight for years and years. And I think it was telling. Recently, one of the Assembly members said they've never seen a coalition like this of coming together for a clean energy bill that folks that don't normally see eye to eye have all come together in supporting this. And what's driving this partly is that the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, continues to fail. Even just a week or so ago, they issued another decision which doubles down on treating these projects as wholesale, which asks developers to use a formula that has resulted in no projects over the last several years, and basically, as I mentioned, doubled down on that and really are stating to folks, we are not going to institute a reliable, effective, scalable, and program here for community solar and storage until the legislature tells us to do so. So AB 1813, again, it requires the PUC to implement a program, sets firm timelines. Some of the key points of this are just reiterating the bill that was passed 4 years ago. These projects have to be compliant with Title 24 building standards here in California. That in and of itself is going to save hundreds of millions of dollars every year in new building construction. It ensures that 51% of subscribers are low-income customers or low-income service organizations. Provides the bill credits that are so important as we talk about affordability. This is a way to reduce energy costs on your bill from 10 to 20%. And for all households, but particularly for low-income households, that is significant savings. And we set parameters. These projects and their subscribers have to be located within the same local reliability area. The bill passed the Assembly floor last month on bipartisan support, and just this week passed Senate Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee. So we're really excited about the progress of this bill. Again, we're going to head over to Senate Appropriations, then the Senate floor, and then ultimately, hopefully, with your support, to the governor's office for signature. And just a couple of things real quick. We do have guardrails that will be included here on the slide presentation as we share that around, but I think it's important to note that we have taken these guardrails to give folks that kind of clarity that these are indeed at the distribution level. It gives folks a chance to evaluate these projects on a regular basis. It's something we are transparent and open with how these projects conform and perform. And then I just want to include some articles. We've got a lot of op-eds that have been coming out. Elected officials, farmers, small business owners have all weighed in and wanted their voices to be heard, and those have been running up and down the state in publications. And then finally, just for you all to enjoy at your leisure, we have a 60-second video that I included in the PowerPoint that can be shared around. Gives you a little bit more flavor on community solar and storage and how that functions. And Senator Caballero is featured here, who's been one of our community solar champions for a number of years and has just been helping Assemblymember Ward lead the fight for community solar and storage. So again, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak. We look forward to having folks weigh in, help us take action. Your voices are absolutely critical as AB 1813 continues to move. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Derek. And these slides will be on our website when we send out a email after today with a recording. So yeah, thanks for providing all those resources. So before we turn to the Q&A, I just want to remind everyone about the actions that you can take today, which we really need you all to contact your legislator to ask them to support these really important bills. As Derek just said, your action is really important because legislators want to hear from you, their constituents, and they often prioritize bills that they're hearing from that are important to their constituents. So you can take action by using your phone to visit the QR code on the slide, or the link is in the chat, and would really appreciate folks taking action and telling your legislators to support these bills. And thanks again to our wonderful speakers. Now we're going to move to the Q&A. So if everyone can come on screen, our four speakers. Awesome. So we're going to start first, just appreciate all the questions in the chat. One of the questions that I want to start with is about power outages during wildfire season. So I'm wondering, we're coming up on a time that wildfires are going to be more frequent. Unfortunately, people are facing these power outages, And, a lot of the solutions that we've talked about today are about community reliability and resilience. So curious if anyone wants to speak to how these bills could support that local resilience and reliability.
I'm happy to jump in. I thought Ken and Matt's comments about needing to rein in unnecessary utility spending around wildfire risks is a really, really important point to just reiterate that while we need to have a reliable and safe grid, we also need to not gold plate it and spend unnecessarily. We can have both an affordable energy supply and not light the state on fire if we do things right. So I just want to center the beginning answer on that. But in addition, people can come up with ways to generate their own electricity and use that electricity when the grid is out. This isn't a permanent solution. We need to stop grid outages. This isn't, this is California after all. But I do want to just emphasize because there was a question in the chat. If you add a battery to a solar system, whether it's a portable system or a permanently mounted on the roof system, that does give you access to that electricity during an outage. With a portable system, if you add a battery to it, which the bill does allow, you basically need to plug in essential devices during an outage in order to have those available, which can be a really critical public safety measure, especially for people on with medical conditions and other issues. So that's basically how those plug-in systems can work during an outage.
Just jump in for a moment here. SB 905 actually has two provisions that I think are relevant to this question. First of all, the bill would establish performance metrics and targets for the utilities. And there's a long list of specific metrics that are outlined in the bill with the opportunity for others to be added. And some of these metrics touch on wildfire prevention and mitigation to try to ensure that the utilities are focused on reducing the number of fires that are caused by their equipment. So setting up these targets and incentives here, that's one way to have the utilities more focused on wildfire safety. The second is that utilities like to spend money on undergrounding their grid. Why do they like to spend the money on that? As Ken mentioned earlier, it's because this is the most expensive way to address wildfire risk. You bury power lines. It's extraordinarily costly, and it's not a scalable solution statewide, meaning there's just simply not enough money to be able to put all of the power lines underground. If we motivate the utilities, instead of trying to bury their power lines, to make their grid safer through grid hardening and other mitigation strategies, they can do more and reduce the risks of fires more effectively across the state. And so I think that's one of the ways that we're trying to get at the issue of how to minimize the need for power shutoffs, which customers hate. Nobody likes to have their power shut off, and it's really not a long-term solution for dealing with this issue.
Thanks, Brenda and Matt. Anyone else want to jump in on the question? All right. Maybe we'll ask one question to Ken. I mean, could you talk a little bit more about electric vehicles and how they can support our grid? Obviously, we've heard a lot today about solar and storage, which, I think folks are familiar with like having a rooftop solar and having a battery that can store the energy, but how about electric vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, when I was talking about SB 913 and the ability to use home batteries to help the grid, if you think about it, the battery in the car in the driveway is 10 times bigger than the battery on the side of your house. And, taking advantage of that, either just through managed charging, shifting the timing of that charging to avoid the peaks, or using the energy in that battery to reduce the power draw from the grid to help support the home during the peaks. There's all these ways that that battery can be just as useful. And by the way, the cost of that battery, it's almost like you bought a battery and they threw in a car with it because the batteries in those electric cars are so cheap compared to the cost of a, home battery that you have to separately install in your house that pretty soon the amount of energy storage in the state will be swamped by the energy storage in the cars, more so than the energy storage, kind of custom put into your house. So we definitely need to be thinking about that as another source of this ability to reduce the peaks on the grid by using that intelligently.
Thanks so much, Ken. There's a question in the chat, which would love to open up. Solar, like these different solar solutions. So we've heard from Bernadette and Derek. Um, Someone is asking about how to get low income assistance for these solar products. So maybe Bernadette, you could talk a little bit about balcony solar, and then Derek, how does community solar kind of support low income folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's exciting and new about plug-in solar or balcony solar is just the price point is much lower because you cut out, the middleman, and again, it's a self-install without the need for a building permit, building modification. So it both lowers costs considerably, and it also makes the solar energy more accessible to more people. Um, so I think, that's a starting point. However, because this market is so nascent, the prices are still relatively kind of high, and we need to see the market grow in order to bring economies of scale and see the prices drop. We expect 50 to 80% in a few short years as a result of California getting into the game, as well as other states like New York, and really bringing prices down. So I think that's number one. There have been a number of legislators that have come up to me in the course of this year to inquire about rebates for low income consumers to make it even easier for them to afford these plug-in devices. So I think conversation to be continued. Whether there's appetite for doing that or not, we don't know. We haven't started the conversation, but I think that's something that could be on the horizon as a way to just get more of these devices in the hands of folks that really need them most. I've also heard of cities and counties wanting to do kind of collective purchasing, make them available for folks on fixed incomes and homebound residents and other folks that really need that support because they're using electricity kind of year round and around the clock. So those are just some ideas that are out there. I think we need to first get the market off the ground, get rid of all of the red tape, make these available on the shelves of every hardware store in every community, and then take the next step of making them more affordable for more people.
Yeah, and I can add to that for community solar and storage. There are a huge amount of Californians that don't own their own roof. They're renters, or they can't afford to put panels on their roof. And community solar and storage is an option for them to both get the clean energy and see that bill savings, rather than incurring the costs that are usually associated with folks who can put panels on their roof. This allows folks to subscribe to a project and then see that line item savings on their utility bill. And it's a way for folks to be part of and engage in that energy transition, that clean energy transition, but also see that affordability measure. Low-income households can save over $300 a year by subscribing to a community solar and storage project. But again, we need the rules in place to make that happen here in California, and that's what we continue to fight for.
Thanks, Derek. We've had a couple questions in the chat about the Public Utilities Commission, and Matt, I know you've been kind of answering these questions in the chat, but I would love for you to kind of share a little bit more about the role of the Public Utilities Commission in a lot of these issues we're talking about today, and how TURN works on some of those regulatory processes of the CPUC to protect low income and protect affordability for electricity.
Thanks, Pooja. My organization spends most of its resources participating in proceedings at the Public Utilities Commission. It is a very broad agency with comprehensive powers over a significant portion of the state's economy. It regulates not only electric utilities, but gas utilities, telecommunications providers, water utilities, railroad safety, Lyft and Uber, party buses, a wide array, moving companies. It's a wide array of entities end up having some aspect of their business regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. And they were set up under the state constitution. So they're really quite a powerful agency. The PUC has 5 members, commissioners, who are selected by the governor and confirmed by the state Senate. Right now, all of the commissioners have been appointed by the current governor. And I think we've generally seen for the last several decades that the PUC has carried out the wishes of the governor. They rarely take positions that are adverse to what the governor wants to happen, even though sometimes there's a game played where there's an attempt to create separation, like as if somehow the PUC is acting on its own. But the truth is that on big controversial issues, they are always working pretty closely with the governor's office. And this can be quite frustrating because this provides opportunities for the powerful utilities and other special interests to essentially lobby the PUC by lobbying the governor. This is what we've seen over the course of many decades, all governors of all parties. Really, it hasn't been unique to this particular administration. The PUC does, I think, generally try to do the right thing, but they get buffeted by a lot of different forces. And we are often quite critical of their decisions and their decision-making processes. For example, Derek's talking about AB 1813, the community solar bill. We worked on the original community solar bill, and the PUC has absolutely dropped the ball on implementing it. In fact, they've done more than drop the ball on implementing the current program. They've engaged in outright resistance and refusal to enforce the will of the legislature, which is why we're going back around for a second pass. With respect to low-income customers, the commission has the authority to set discounts for low-income customers, to deal with disconnection policies and arrearage policy. So it's a very powerful agency, and there's a lot they can do. The biggest problem is participation. These issues are extremely complicated, very technical. Utilities will file proposals. Their proposals will be hundreds of pages backed by thousands or tens of thousands of pages of work papers and detailed documents. It really requires quite a lot of expertise to even understand what they're asking for. So public interest advocates are outgunned in front of the Public Utilities Commission. And I think, honestly, the Public Utilities Commission itself is outgunned by the utilities in many cases. And the default for them is to, when things get really tough or complicated, is to just approve what the utilities want. And that's part of what we're fighting against.
Thanks so much, Matt. I really I know the CPUC is kind of a wonky topic to end on, but I think really important for our audience to understand, the role of the CPUC in a lot of these important legislation. So really want to thank everyone for joining and asking all these questions, and really appreciate our speakers for providing their expertise joining us here today. So just want to do another last quick reminder for folks to take action to support these bills: SB 868, the Plug into the Sun Act, AB 1813, the Community Renewable Energy Program Act, and SB 905. So you can take action to support these bills by contacting your legislator using this really simple form on our website, and you can use the QR code here or visit the link in the chat. So I will leave it there. Thanks everyone again for joining, and really appreciate everyone's time.